Hello, Yamina. Take your time. We also had technical issues at the beginning, so we usually use Zoom, but this is our first time using the webinar.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, okay. So I change mic. I think it should be fine now. I hope it will not restart again. Oh, okay, sorry. Oh, do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Jong-Sim, can I start?
Yes.
Okay.
Sure.
So it should not be restarting again, like with the other one. Oh my God, I got shocked.
It's early in the morning in France.
Yeah, it's early morning.
Yeah. It's late afternoon here.
Yeah,
and
I know.
welcome to
Thank
the
you.
webinar, and thank you so much for joining. I'll explain the outline of the webinar before we start. We'll start with a welcome and introduction of Dr. Yamina Saheb by the standing representative of Interreligious Climate and Ecology Network, Brother Aloysiu Kim. And this webinar is not a lecture based, but it's more of an interview style. So I have prepared a set of questions, and we chose to do this way because we find it a little bit more engaging. So if you have questions that you would like to ask, please, at the end of the questions, we'll have a time to open the platform for the attendees to ask Yamina directly their questions.
Okay, so we have attendees waiting for us.
Sorry?
Do we have attendees? Because I thought it was the interview just between the two of us.
There are people who are joining, some of them have turned on their cameras, and some of them are listening to you using the subtitle function. If they ask questions in Korean, then I will be translating. Yes.
Sure, okay.
So Brother Aloysiu, would you like?
Yes, sure.
Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, okay. Good afternoon, everyone in Korea. And then Yamina Saheb is maybe early morning. My name is Aloysiu Jonghwa Kim. I'm a Franciscan, a Catholic priest, and working for ICE Network in Korea and in Asia also. We live in a critical time of multiple crises. Temperatures are rising faster and faster than scientists predicted, and climate disasters are rampant around the world. Climate change is contributing to biodiversity loss and ecosystem destruction. That's what the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's 6th report says. By limiting the temperatures increase to 1.5 degrees or less, we must prevent the possibility of climate catastrophe. To achieve the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal, we need to transition to renewable energy, but we cannot rely on that transition alone because most of the mineral resources needed for that transition are reserved in the global south area. So this transition must affect ecosystems and people's livelihood and rights in the global south. So we need to reduce energy use and material throughput in addition to transitioning to renewable energy. Reducing energy and material use will make the energy transition perfect, which is why the concept of sufficiency is so important. I'd like to thank Dr. Yamina Saheb for joining us today to share her insights on why sufficiency is so important nowadays and what kinds of technologies we should be using in mitigating climate disruption. Let me introduce Dr. Yamina Saheb. Yamina Saheb is a lecturer and researcher and science for Paris, a lead author of the IPCC report on climate change mitigation and a senior fellow at Open EXP. I don't know exactly in your company or some community. Prior to this position, Yamina was a senior fellow researcher at the University of Minster and previously a senior researcher at the University of Lausanne. In 2018, Yamina was the head of the Energy Efficiency Unit at the Energy Charter Secretariat. Before that, she was a policy and scientific officer at the Renewables and Energy Efficiency Unit at the Institute of Energy and Transport of the Joint Research Center, JRC, of the European Commission. She also worked as a senior buildings energy efficiency policy analysis at the IEA. Yamina holds a PhD in energy engineering, master's degrees on landscape architecture and development economics, and engineering degree in building technologies. I don't know exactly, so many things are here. Yes, thank you for your joining us, and then we clapped for your joining us. Yes, Yamina, it is for your time.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. As I guess the audience is mainly from South Korea. Thank you for the opportunity to share with you what we learned when we were working on the IPCC report on sufficiency. So for the first time, the concept of sufficiency has been introduced in the IPCC report with a definition. There has been no definition before. But before that, I will back up a little bit. Why sufficiency and what is the concept about? So sufficiency is not new concept at all. You will find sufficiency or sufficiency measures or actions in all the civilizations or the countries that are not highly industrialized. And you will find this also in religious books, in holy books. But then bringing sufficiency to policy making is new. The first country to consider sufficiency in its policies is Thailand, but it's not well known. And they introduced sufficiency in the 90s based on a book that was published in mid-70s. But it did not cross the borders of Thailand. For some reason that I don't know, it stayed within Thailand. And we don't know much about the implementation. The only thing I know about Thailand is that they even introduced sufficiency in their education program. So my generation in Thailand learned about the sufficiency concept at school, which is not the case of my generation in France. In the Western world, sufficiency was brought to the energy transition debate by a German colleague, researcher, Wolfgang Sachs, early 90s. And for some reason that we don't know yet, it did not fly in Germany, but it crossed the French border. And in France, a group of people organized in an NGO developed the first scenario, the first energy transition scenario in the world, which considers sufficiency measures. And it's based on sufficiency, efficiency, and renewables, this scenario. That was early 2000. And then by publishing this scenario, it became, the sufficiency concept became discussed in the French society, to the point that in 2013, we had our government worked on the energy transition law, which was adopted in 2015. And during these 2 years, there has been a lot of debate about sufficiency. And this is why in France, the energy transition law from 2015 includes sufficiency. So it is based on sufficiency, efficiency, renewables. Why? But then it's only on energy. So the French vision and the Western vision of sufficiency has been only related to energy, while the Thai vision relates to all natural resources. It's much more comprehensive what Thailand did than what the French did, or what was done in the Western world. In the US, sufficiency is not part of any policy instrument. However, the most comprehensive book on sufficiency from the Western world was written by an American researcher, Thomas Princeton. And the book is The Logic of Sufficiency. So there are two major references to read if you are completely new to the concept. One is the sufficiency philosophy. I will write them down in the chat, One is the sufficiency philosophy from Thailand. Let me just find how to write discussion. Sufficiency philosophy economy. And the other one is logic of sufficiency. But in the case of France, the fact that we included the word sufficiency in the energy transition law does not mean that the government put in place policy measures that are sufficiency measures. And importantly, in France, sufficiency was not defined, has never been defined before the IPCC report. And then in France is the exception. In France, in 2020-2021, we had two more scenarios. So we had this scenario from the NGO. They update it every 5 years, their scenario. And now they expanded the scenario to materials, which was not the case before. And then we had the French Energy Agency, ADEME, or the French, now it's called the French, you could look at this online. Now it's called the French Ecological Transition Agency, developed scenarios which include sufficiency, different type of scenarios with only efficiency and renewables, scenarios with sufficiency, and scenarios with less efficiency, etc., to see where we are heading. And importantly is that these scenarios developed by ADEME, they also included the macroeconomic analysis, so never happened before. So we know the macroeconomic impact of scenario driven by sufficiency compared to the macroeconomic impact of scenarios without sufficiency. So this is where sufficiency has spread since the publication of the IPCC report. And you know, we also have the energy crisis in Europe because of the war in Ukraine. So the sufficiency is now debated. It started first in the French-speaking countries like Switzerland, Belgium, Luxembourg, but there are not that many. And just last week, we were at the European Parliament at the Beyond Growth Conference. I will send you, so it's plenary 3, everything is recorded. You can look at this. Plenary 3. Oh, sorry, plenary 3. And for the first time, sufficiency was discussed in the European Parliament. Why it is important? Because in the case of European countries, the climate policies are European policies. We don't decide, it's not a sole decision of France or Germany. And that's why it was important to bring this to the EU level. So now, the fact that it was in the IPCC report and it was there with the definition, and we had all these scenarios, made it easier to have it discussed at the European Parliament. Now we need to wait. The current mandate of the Parliament is ending in 1 year exactly. So it's not going to be in the EU legislation right now, but we are hoping that it will be in the next legislation round in the EU. So what sufficiency is about? Sufficiency is defined around 4 pillars. The first one is sufficiency is about the set of policy measures and daily practices. So first, policy measures and daily practices. So in the case of France, for example, not only that the sufficiency concept has been narrowed down to energy only, but at the same time, it has been narrowed down to behavior change. So when we had the energy crisis, the French president, Emmanuel Macron, decided that our government will develop energy sufficiency plans. But when you look at the details of the measures, all the measures that are there are based on what each individual will do on voluntary basis. And this does not work. So sufficiency in reality is a set of policies and daily practices. I give you an example. I don't know how is the situation in South Korea, but in France, in Paris, 25 years ago, it was impossible to bike in Paris because it was too dangerous and we did not have biking lines. But since 2001, the municipality had a policy to make sure we have biking lines, safe biking lines. And when we had the COVID crisis, it has speeded up building more safe biking lines. The result of this, so this is the policy, the result of this is that more and more people are biking in Paris, and it became social norm. Now everyone bikes, which was not the case 25 years ago. And then, of course, as Parisian, as someone who lives in Paris, I could still decide to use a car in Paris. However, because it is allowed by the law, however, using a car in Paris became a real burden. The more you make it a burden, the more you make it easier to use public transport, the more you have public transport and you have safe biking lines, and you make it easier to people to shift from their car, the use of car to other mobility modes, the more people will shift. And this is the most important piece. One of the important pieces in the definition is that it's about policies. So it's political decision if we make sufficiency. And then this is the first pillar. The second pillar is that these policies aim at avoiding upfront the use of all natural resources. In the IPCC final definition, we included energy, materials, water, and land. But actually, if you go back to the original text, you will find that it includes all natural resources. Why? So for example, if you all know about efficiency, what we have done with efficiency in the last 30 years is that we improve the efficiency of the product. And this means that we have more efficient product put in the market, and we are encouraged as citizens to buy the most efficient product. What we do not include in our efficiency discussion is the impact of producing this new product on materials, on other natural resources. So any new production for any product requires resources, including energy, to produce them. Sufficiency is about avoiding upfront the use of all natural resources. And the third pillar is the fact that sufficiency is about what is today called climate justice, equity and climate justice. So sufficiency is about delivering well-being for all. And I would say that sufficiency is mainly about protecting, is first about protecting the most vulnerable ones. Because if we would have had sufficiency policies in France and in Europe, we would not have homeless people, while at the same time we have non-used buildings. We have plenty of square meters that are constructed that are not used, but on the other hand, we have homeless people. This should not occur in one of the G7 countries, but it occurs because we don't have sufficiency measures. Among the reasons why it occurs. So the third pillar is that it's about well-being for all. The fourth pillar is the last one and very important for OECD countries, is about within the planetary boundaries. So we don't talk about the carbon budget, we talk about the planetary boundaries, which goes beyond the carbon budget. The climate change is one of the boundaries. We have 9 planetary boundaries, and we should not cross the planetary boundaries, because when we cross the planetary boundaries, then we disturb the system, the overall system. And this is what is happening today. We have crossed more than one planetary boundary. So, sorry. And this is what is happening today. So basically, it's about protecting all the spices, the human spice first, but also other spices, because when we cross the planetary boundaries, we destroy the system, we destroy the spices that we need for us to be in this planet. So these are the 4 concepts, the four pillars behind included that we must include in sufficiency. Now, if you look where sufficiency is implemented, as I told you, Thailand seems to be the most advanced country, but we don't have enough literature evaluation of what has been done in Thailand about that. So maybe something that you would be interested to look how it is done in Thailand, and it's more comprehensive. And then France, it is in the law, but not really implemented. What we have done is not sufficiency. It's not at all in the EU policies. We are trying to have it in the EU policies. And outside the EU policies, it's not in any OECD country policies. And why do we need sufficiency from climate perspective? In the IPCC report, we show that we could reduce our emissions by 2050, by up to 70% of emissions could be avoided by 2050 if we consider sufficiency measures today in all sectors, when all sectors considered. So the potential to reduce emissions using sufficiency is very high. However, it's not in the policies and it's not in the scenarios, in the models. So the models, these global models that we use for the IPCC, for example, do not consider sufficiency measures at all. And this potential is there. I think the next round of the models, of the scenarios, will consider sufficiency, although some people call it differently, but they will consider more and more of this kind of measures. Over to you.
Okay. Thank you for a very comprehensive definition of sufficiency and the history of it and how it is actually practically being applied in more in the EU context, it sounds like. You said efficiency is problematic because it encourages more consumption of more efficient product. And one question that I would like to ask you is that I think in a non-English speaking countries like Korea, some of the UN generated terms like nature-based solutions or efficiency, energy efficiency, green capitalism take on and they become viral because I think it's really easy to take that term out of the context and recontextualize in a way that we want it to be. And so nature-based solution is often used by both NGOs and corporations as a way to propose as like a solution to target net zero. So could you share your thoughts on carbon capture storage, bioenergy with carbon capture storage?
Yeah. So if you look at the global scenarios that are aiming to net zero, they all include carbon capture and storage. But all these scenarios do not include sufficiency measures. This is the important part. So they miss the opportunity to decarbonize upfront. And then we end up in 2050 in situation where we are above the 1.5 degree target. And then they imagined a magic solution of carbon capture and storage. In reality, if you look at in the IEA website, they have a page on carbon capture and storage. I will write here IEA and I can look for you for the page. IEA, you type there CCUS and you will see how many projects that exist today. They started working on it and a lot of money has been put in carbon capture and storage. And you will see how many projects are there and how many are successful. This is what matters. There are not that many. So we may need, there are two ways to capture and store carbon. There is a natural way, which is through forests, etc. However, to respond to our overconsumption, we have destroyed, we worked on deforestation mainly. So, and with the forest, it's not, if you plant tree today, it's not going to start capturing carbon today. It needs time. Given the time that we have to decarbonize our economy, forest cannot be of help today, you see? During the time frame is not the same, actually. And then the techno-solutionists, this is how we call them in Europe, techno-solutionist people, so they will tell you that we will the techno-solutionist people, they will tell you that we can capture carbon everywhere and even from the air and then direct capture from the air. But in reality, we are not able yet to do that. And the reality is that we cannot store carbon everywhere. There are some conditions to store carbon. And all this is not taken into account in these scenarios. They just make an estimate of actually all what is left as carbon that is not, they did not decarbonize because they missed the sufficiency opportunity from the start. Then they say this will be captured and stored. The difference between these scenarios is how much of carbon will be captured and stored. This is the main difference. But they all project carbon capture and storage. So basically, we cannot rely on this because the technology is not ready, and because we already know that we cannot store as much carbon as we would like, and we cannot store carbon everywhere.
Thank you. So the third pillar that you mentioned about equity and climate justice, that the sufficiency is a tool for us to achieve well-being for all species. Can you talk about the importance of the relationship between the global south and global north? At the Beyond Growth conference, you mentioned about like the problems with trade policies, and you said that we have to stop using the carbon budget, which should be mainly allocated to the countries that did not contribute to climate crisis.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
So if you look at, for example, the climate neutrality target of the EU and all OECD countries, so our climate neutrality target is for 2050. But how is it set? So by 2050, we aim to be climate neutral. But how is this climate target set? By considering a reduction in emissions compared to 1990. We do not consider our past emissions, our cumulative emissions. While from climate change perspective, what matters is today's emissions, but also the cumulative emissions. And by considering only from 1990, what it means that it's like we don't acknowledge our responsibility in the climate change as the first thing. And then it's like if we are starting at the same level like emerging economies, because this is where emerging economies started going up. While in reality, it's not the case. And then we end up in 2050, you know, the carbon budget, you must imagine this like cake. So if you take a big share of the cake, so there will be less for others. What is happening with the climate neutrality targets today is that we have already, OECD countries have already taken the biggest 3/4 of this carbon budget, but we do consider in the quarter that is left that we are going to divide it equally. This is not equity because we have already eaten 3/4, you see? And that's why I recalculated for the EU. It was first done by a British colleague. He did it for the UK. And then I used this methodology to calculate it for the EU. And in the case of the EU, if we would consider our cumulative emissions, our past emissions, we should be climate neutral early EU 28. I did calculations for EU with the UK with us at that time. We should be climate neutral by 2033, which is a huge difference than 2050. Why? It has two important implications. One is for our policies, because if you say that your climate neutrality target is for 2050, so you give yourself time that you don't have in reality. So you put in place non-ambitious policies or less ambitious policies because it's for 2050, not for 2033, you see? And then the other implications, the other major implication is for the South. By deciding that our carbon neutrality target will be for 2050, this means that we are taking the carbon budget of other countries. We are not allowing the South to develop. This is what it means. And this is why it's kind of, it's a neo-colonial approach, actually. It's continuation of colonialism in reality, because we have taken their resources, first the human resources, the natural resources, and now we take their share of the carbon budget to make us feel, to avoid us to make the transformation or the metamorphosis we must make in our countries. So this is, and then there is an important point related to the scenarios. What you need to know is that these scenarios, these global scenarios, do not consider equity between the North and the South. They do expand in inequalities, North-South inequalities. This is quite shocking, actually, because for my generation, developing neo-colonial scenarios is just shocking. But actually, my colleagues did not really think about it. It's only now that is debated in this scenarios community. So again, I assume that the next round of scenarios will consider more equity North-South. I don't know how they are going to solve the dilemma, because if you consider north-south equity, then you must, the north must decarbonize earlier. While today, in the scenarios, the burden of decarbonization in reality is more put on the south than on the north, which is unfair.
So then I think this is related to the next question that I would like to ask. So you think you also speak about how renewable energies in and of themselves are not the answer, because it also can encourage consumption. And so, for instance, I live on an island in Korea, and here electric cars have become a big boom. So the government of the state plans to change all cars to electric cars by 2050, 100%. But then that means that we will be extracting mines, which are in the global south. So then renewables are the answers, but then they risk environmental destruction. So how do you mitigate? How do you?
So renewables alone are not enough. We will always need efficient technologies. We will always need renewables, of course, because we must end the fossil fuel era. We need to get out of fossil fuels. I did not answer your question about trade, but I can come back to it later. But if we don't put in place a sufficiency, and the electrical vehicle example is good illustration of this misleading thinking, actually, that has been pushed by, I worked for 20 years on efficiency policies by people like me, but it was impossible at that time. 20 years ago, it was impossible to work on sufficiency policies in Europe. It's only now that we have this opportunity. And then I tried several times. I never succeeded before. So it's the first time that there is a hope that we will succeed. We are not yet there, but there is a hope. At least there is a hope. We had no hope 10 years ago. So electric vehicles is a good illustration for that, and easy to understand. In reality, you as a citizen, you have a mobility need. You don't have an electrical vehicle need. You don't have a vehicle need. You have a mobility need. Your need is to move from point A to point B on a regular basis or not, right? This is your need. The answer that has been proposed to our mobility need since Ford, since the first vehicle, was to have individual cars. This has been the answer proposed by the industry, right? And then what policies did is they tried to make this answer as efficient as possible, which is good. Any technological solution that you put in the market should be as efficient as possible. And now with electrical vehicles, they are trying to make the energy used for the vehicles decarbonize, which is also good. However, they did not, given that they did not start from the first point, which is your need, mobility need. So the answer is likely to be wrong, is likely to lead to more extraction of other resources. But if your government starts, or we have the same issue in Europe, everyone is working on electric vehicles. If we start from your mobility needs, so in Paris city, for example, what we have, there is a concept called the city of 15 minutes. You can Google this and you will see there is literature on it. City 15 minutes. So what is a city of 15 minutes? It is a city where your basic needs, you can do them by walking or biking in 15 minutes in your neighborhood, which is no longer the case in many cities, you see? So if this means it has an impact, where does this start? It starts from the land use and planning policies. You see where it starts? So it goes far beyond energy issues, and it has an impact on energy consumption, your energy consumption related to cars, to your mobility, and it has an impact on your freedom of mobility, because you are more free. And the other thing that you are more free if you do your basic needs, you just go out and you have your food, you have all your basic needs met. Then if you need a car, because if you need a car, this means you need to park it, it's more stress, etc. But the car industry has been extremely smart. It's like the tobacco industry, or all these polluting industries are very smart. So they have been selling to us having individual cars as freedom. So if you don't have a car, so I don't have a car, And very often people think if you don't have a car, this means you are poor. I am middle class. I'm not poor. I am a researcher, so I'm not rich, but I actually could afford to have a car, but it's just that I don't need a car. I don't need a car because I am lucky. I live in a city where I can have we do everything. I have a little boy. We do almost everything by biking or by walking, or when it's raining, we have the bus. Or you have a public transport. I have public transport. We use very rarely public transport. We use it only when the weather is extremely bad, because my son is only 3 years old, so I cannot handle it. I cannot carry him all the time. But most of the time, we do everything by biking or walking. So, but I am among the lucky people who live in a city like that. So the answer, that's why, of course, from time to time, I do need a car from time to time. So we do rent a car only when we need it. I do not need to have my individual car. So I am not locked in because I am lucky to live in a city where I am not locked in. You see? And then if you don't mind, I come back to the question of the trade that I mentioned at the Beyond Growth conference. So the trade system that we have, the EU has more than 3,000 trade agreements with different countries, etc. But the trade system has always been about taking resources from the south to satisfy the north, for the north. It has always been like that. And the trade agreement I mentioned is the Energy Charter Treaty, which is a treaty that was put in place in the 90s by EU countries, Western countries. At that time, we were only 15. Today, we are 27. At that time, we were only 15. And they put this in place to protect our investment of the Western European companies like Total, Shell, BP, etc. in the energy sector in the republics that did emerge from the collapse of the Soviet Union. So because Soviet Union, and I don't think in the 90s people realized that most of our fossil fuels were coming actually from what is today Russia. So because it was the Soviet Union, I don't think we had the data, disaggregated data by country. So that's why the Europeans, when the Soviet Union collapsed, they thought that, okay, we will need to have an agreement with all these republics. And then they put in place this, this trade agreement. The protection goes through the company. So if, for example, South Korea is not party to this treaty, you are lucky because it protects fossil fuels at a high cost for the taxpayers. That's why I say you are lucky. But what it does is that as a foreign investor, myself, if I am investing and if I am investing in one of the countries party to this treaty, and then the government of this country decides to change the law. For example, there were subsidies, and then they decide that subsidies are no longer needed. But given that I have done my calculations by considering the subsidies, so I am allowed to sue this government in private arbitration. So it's parallel justice system, and to ask for high compensations. Compensations is around €1 billion. It's a lot of money that taxpayers pay. And this private arbitration system was created by the Dutch when they had to decolonize. So it's again continuation of colonialism, actually, because it's again continuation of the control of the north of the resources of the south. What happened recently is that this private arbitration has been used against EU countries. This is new. And that's why we started working on, and actually this, I started working on it because this treaty protects all investment in fossil fuels, in all energy supply, including fossil fuels. This means this treaty protects investment in greenhouse gas emissions. This is what it means actually in practice. And this is why now we have 9 EU countries that decided to withdraw. But for us, we are member states and also party to this treaty as EU. So now we are working on the withdrawal of the EU. If the EU overall withdraw, so this means this treaty will die by itself because we are funding this treaty. You are lucky South Korea is not party to this treaty. And we are lucky we managed to stop one country, Uganda, could have been party to this treaty in 2020, but we managed to stop this. And then the only Asian country that is an OECD country that is party to this treaty is Japan. And Japan has been so far very conservative. They did not want to withdraw, but it does not, if the EU withdraw, I assume that if the EU withdraw, all other countries will withdraw because it does not make any sense for Japan to stay there if the EU is not there.
Wow, that's
amazing, yeah?
That's very fascinating to hear. The Energy Charter
Treaty.
Treaty that existed before Russia and then has continued with this arbitrary agreement. And I think that also reflects what you spoke about, how to view freedom.
Exactly.
So now can we move to the second part where we're curious about the writing mechanism of the IPCC report. So this neo-colonial approach, I mean, you know, your radical language is very provocative and, you know, in a way it's very eye-opening because you're an insider and because you're a woman and because you're interracial. So can you speak about your experience as a scientist, woman and interracial scientist, and speak about, so it is, you know, if I Google IPCC, then it says it's supposed to represent all global community, but do you agree with it? And yeah.
No, it's not what the figures show. I am from North Africa. I am Algerian and French citizen. I have two citizenships. I am from the south and the north at the same time. So for the IPCC process to be part of the IPCC process, you must apply through your government. So you have you need to find in your government the focal point. It's called like that, the focal point, IPCC focal point for South Korea. You need to find this in your government somewhere. If you Google this in your websites, you will find that. Then this person, it depends of the countries. So in the south, at the best, we have one person. In the north, if I compare between Algeria and France, so in Algeria, we have one person, he has no support and he receives plenty of emails, etc. It's very difficult to manage. But in France, we have a team of people. So there is a big difference when you have a team and you have one person, right? The support that you could have from your government. This is the first discrimination, actually. This is the first inequality issue that we don't discuss usually. So in my case, given that I am from the south and the north, so I went through the French government first, and it is the French team who explained to me the process. I was talking to the French team, but then of course I got the support from the Algerian delegate, the Algerian focal point, because I am also Algerian and I applied as Algerian. So to apply, it's quite easy. I guess in South Korea, you have more than one person. You have a team because South Korea is an OECD country. So I would say that in OECD countries, we have teams, and in non-OECD countries, we have one person, except emerging economies like China and India, where there are more people. And then these people, their role is to share the information with the national scientists. Whatever is going on at the IPCC level, you receive the information through these people, through this focal point. Then to apply, you have to fill in form. It's the same form that we all complete with your name, etc., gender, blah, 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 the normal form for any application. Plus you add up to three publications that you consider relevant for the topic you are applying for. So I think at this stage, then it goes, your government will nominate you. So you will be nominated by your government. So again, if you have a team working on this, so they will look for nominations and help you. I was helped by the French team because it was my first experience. But if you have only one person, that was the case of the Algerian guy, he did not have time for me. He was doing many other things, and he had other applications. So he couldn't spend time. This is the first inequality issue. And then they have a meeting, all these people, where all the countries are represented, and they will give the names of the people they have nominated. Of course, when it came to this meeting, the Algerian delegate said that he was nominating me. I was nominated from Algeria with the support of France. So this is the first step. And then, so if you overcome this first step, then you are in the list. Then we ended, I think they were, if I'm not mistaken, you need to look at the exact data, more than 800 people applied for the last IPCC working group 3, yeah? Because there are 3 groups. I am from working group 3. And then, sorry, then you have scientists, your peers, who have been already elected through a similar process, what we call the IPCC Bureau, who will select in these 800 people, more than 800, they selected 280. We were by the end only narrowed down to 200, so two-thirds disappeared. But to go through this, in this second step, so what they will do is that you are either known to them because you know them, you are in this international network, which is unlikely to be the case for people from the South, or they will Google or they will look to scientific databases like Scopus Web of Science. But if you are from the South and English is not your language, it is unlikely that you will be publishing in English and that your name ends up in these databases that are only in English. It is unlikely. I think it's the same story for you in South Korea, because you don't use even the same characters like the Latin characters, you see? So no matter how many publications you have, it is unlikely that you end up there. So basically, if you are not known to these people and you have been writing in your language, you have been contributing in your language, because this is what you should be doing. You are paid by public money in your country. Then it is unlikely that you end up selected. So this is the first inequality. This is the second inequality, you see? And then, of course, they try to have gender balance, country balance, etc. So then you might be selected, for example, because you are female from South Korea. Let's assume that there are not that many female from South Korea contributing. And they may not even, actually, I think we put a gender. Yeah, because, you know, it's very difficult to know if you don't speak the language, if the person is female or male, just from, because there is no picture, there is nothing. It's very difficult. But I think there is gender in what we fill in the form we fill in. And then, let's assume that you are selected, and then the IPCC writing process starts. Usually in the IPCC, we have 4 meetings, 4 lead authors meeting. And then you have in these meetings, all the meetings are in English. Everything is done in English. Although the IPCC is very inclusive and considers all the UN languages. That's the theory. In practice, all the meetings are in English. You see, you are the only one who is talking to me. I see people writing in South Korean, which is fine. But in the IPCC meeting, we cannot have something like that. It has to be in English, you see? So basically, you arrive to these meetings and everything is in English. If you are not used to speak English, to work in this international era, it is unlikely that you would contribute, you see? And then we start writing. And when you write, we also write everything in English. And in my case, for example, regarding sufficiency, most of the literature on sufficiency, given the history that I told you about, is in French. So I was writing and I was considering, I was putting references in French, even the French language, which is in theory UN language. So at some point I received a reply that from the IPCC editor that his French is very scholar. He cannot read because I sent him some references. He did not want sufficiency. He was asking more questions. So I sent him some references from where I have translated the text. And then he said that his French is very scholar. However, his partner was able to read. And these are the questions I have. So I ended answering questions of partner who is not part of the IPCC process. Because my reference was in French. You see? And then to be able to write, you need to have access to these databases, Web of Science, Scopus, etc. Because what the IPCC is about, it's about assessing the scientific literature. When you are in the South, the access to these databases is very costly. So these people do not have access to databases. So even if you would like, you manage to overcome all the first 3 or 4 barriers, you end up there, you would like to write, you don't have access to the literature to assess. So if you don't have access to the material you need to do your work, it is unlikely that you will do your work. In this IPCC cycle, there has been something exceptional that happened, which was the COVID-19. With the COVID-19, we had only 2 lead author meetings, in-person meetings, and then the rest of the work, everything was done online. Everything was done through Zoom. And it happens that internet does not work in the same way in the north and in the south. So some of the colleagues, but this is later on, I heard about these stories, some of the colleagues couldn't connect. They were with the COVID, so they were just out of the loop. And there has been no solution for them, because the solution would have been, for example, because in all these countries we have UN offices. The solution would have been for the meetings, these should have been allowed to use UN facilities, you see? And for the language, we have the solution. When you have a UN meeting, or when I was at the European Parliament, you can speak in your language, but there is translation to 22 EU languages, all the EU languages. So we need to have this, and it's important that people express themselves in their language, because this is the only way to say all what you think, actually. You see? And then there is another issue that is cultural issue, which is in the Anglo-Saxon world, kids are empowered since they are 2, or before they are born, I think, they are empowered to speak out. But in many other cultures, we are not empowered to speak out. I guess it's the same in South Korea. In my culture, in my world, even in the French part, because I am in both, we learn to not speak unless we are more than 100% sure about what we are saying, not disturbing others. But if I would have been in this if I would have been raised in the Anglo-Saxon bubble, I would have learned to speak all the time, do not shut up at all. So then you end up in meetings, even if you speak English, dominated all the time by the same people. So I am sorry, this is not inclusive.
Wow. Yeah, that is very interesting. It sounds like it's a very colonial way of running the space, because it's one-sided. So if you are qualified for these conditions that I asked you for, then you are included. But otherwise, you can try as much as you want to, but I cannot guarantee you anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, of course, in the meetings, you always have, in addition to that, you have the gender issue, the gender. But this is very common everywhere. When females speak, it's very rare that male listens to them, but it happens that male will pick up your idea and then put it in their way, and it will be a great idea. I guess you experienced it. We have all experienced this at least once in our life. You see?
It has happened historically too, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, so you add to this, if you are from the South and the female, etc., so you add another barrier. So basically, it makes the process very exclusive and not inclusive.
Yeah. So thank you for speaking out from the privileged position that you hold. I think it really helps other people, non-scientists and ordinary citizens, to understand that it's not an absolutely like subjective, some kind of entity that exists in separation, but it very much reflects the way the reality is shaped.
Yeah.
So I think now I want to open the floor to the participants if there are any questions or comments. And this recording will be later added with Korean subtitles and will be added to the YouTube channel.
Send me a link, I will promote it even in Korean, but yes. I don't have Korean contacts on LinkedIn, but I will put it.
Yes, we will. Is there any question? You can either unmute and share your question, or you can use the chat box. No questions? Or Jung-hee, feel free to unmute and turn on your camera. Among us, we have been watching several lectures by you.
Hi, Yamina. Thank you very
Hello.
much for thank you very much for your talk, and I was very moved by your ideas and talk about the concept of sufficiency, and especially about the inequality and colonial style structured writing process and reporting process of IPCC. So I have a question for the process about the I don't remember the name of the report, SPM.
The SPM, okay, summary for policymakers.
SPM, yes. Yes, I as far as I know, the scientists who engage in writing process, they are usually participating in the in writing SPM, right?
Yeah.
Then after their writing, and the representative of governments from the all around the governments, they they have right to correct.
Yeah, I can explain to you the process.
Yeah.
Do you want do you want me to explain the process? Okay.
Yeah.
So in the IPCC report, we have the main report, which is a literature review that is written by scientists, that is summarized by scientists, and then we have a technical summary, which is in our case, I was in the building chapter. Our chapter was, I think, more than around 200 pages, I think. But then from there, the technical summary is usually for directors at ministries, for example. And we were allowed to write 4 pages. So going from almost 200 pages to 4 pages. And then from there, we write as well the summary for policymakers. So we were given 300 words, space for 300 words. So go and summarize 300 words, everything in 300 words. And there is a review process that is interesting in the IPCC. First, we draft what we call the first order draft. It is sent for review. It is made public. People can subscribe to review it. It is for experts only. Scientists and not governments cannot review the first order draft because it's very an early draft. And then the second order draft is reviewed by governmental representative and the experts, the non-governmental representative. And then when we submit a second order draft, we also submit for the first time the summary for policymakers. And then the summary for policy, then we have comments, and we receive plenty of comments, so many comments. It's just it's crazy situation actually. And then what we do is that then we have the summary for policymakers. We have this plenary session for the approval of the summary for policymakers. So the main report and the technical summary are not approved by government. The only text that is approved is the summary for policymakers. And the summary for policymakers, the other two are accepted by government as they are, because they assume that we have updated them based on the changes we made in the summary for policymakers. So it is quite impressive to arrive to this plenary session, and you have a representative from different governments, and then you will see again this distortion. So OECD countries are represented by more than one person, and in the South, at the best, you have one person representing the government. You see, so you find again this difference that I mentioned earlier. And then what they do is that they go through the summary for policymakers, line by line, word by word. And usually they ask us to explain. So I can give you the example of sufficiency. They ask us to explain what they don't understand, because they are policymakers, they don't know all the scientific word that we write. First, and the second point is that it is drafted by a scientist. And I'm sorry, scientists are not used to write for policymakers. Most of the scientists do not write for the policymakers. And you don't write scientific paper in the way you write summary for policymakers. You don't, it cannot be the same. They go, and then it was edited by the chairs and the technical support unit. So in our case, when government received the summary for policymakers, they received there are two governments who have included plenty of negative comments about sufficiency. 2 governments only, and especially one more than the other one. So sufficiency was the word for which we received the highest number of negative comments. But it was mainly from one government. So it's not representative of the word. But it happens that it's powerful government. So it represents the word. You see? So we end up in this situation. So the decision of the editors was that sufficiency has to be removed from the summary for policymakers. So after we received this comment, we had a meeting and we were told sufficiency cannot go to the summary for policymakers. However, in our case, we structured our chapter around sufficiency, efficiency, renewables. If you remove sufficiency, then our chapter does not make sense. And we were given, there was a guy in the bureau who was in charge of making us writing these 300 words without the word sufficiency, without any reference to sufficiency. So we have written something that did not make sense, even to me. I was writing it that did not make sense. So the only thing this guy was able to do is to ask me for plenty of data calculations, you know, because you read a text that does not make sense, trying to make sense from something that does not make sense. So you create extra work that is not needed. So I worked several hours for nothing. Then we ended in the plenary session. And at the plenary session, the French delegate and then some other European delegates, they said that you can remove the building section. These 300 words are useless because the main thing that was there was sufficiency. Now it disappeared. Now it's just figures. You did plenty of percentages, and it's very difficult because for policymakers, they cannot capture all the percentages. It was too much. And then they said, we need to have it back because this is what we do and this is what we are aiming for, and we understood well the concept. Then we ended last minute. I was asked to redraft the 300 words for the building chapter. And I was given very little time to redraft it. So what I did was that I brought my original text, the one that was removed. I just brought the original text there. And I brought it last minute. So we had to go back to the plenary because we had 1 hour, I think, to do it. And then we had to go back to the plenary, and the editors did not have time to remove sufficiency again. Then we ended in the approval with the word that they did not want. They were scared that it would not be approved. Then in this case, you end up in what they call a huddle. So only those government interested, because you have all UN governments, all countries party to the UN, but not all of them talk actually because of this representation thing. You know, most people from the South do not talk. And then, because again, it's in English, again, another thing, it's in English. And then, so you make the assumption that governmental officials everywhere in the world speak very well English and can negotiate in English, which is just a wrong assumption. And then we ended in a huddle. And in the huddle, when I saw the person who was going to moderate the session, I thought, oh my goodness, it's over. Because this person was from this government who was negative about sufficiency. But then, interestingly, we got support from emerging economies because we had a representative from emerging economies who have read the chapter and who have said, we understand very well, without sufficiency, we cannot decarbonize. And that's why they said, you keep the word sufficiency. So I had to fight to keep the word because I was under pressure, because I was receiving messages that just accept the changes, otherwise they will remove the full text. But I did not do that. And then not only that we had the definition, but then this lady said that we had the word. She said, but okay, I agree if it's new it's a new word even for us. So can you please include a definition? But actually I proposed originally to have definition. And that's why we have a footnote with the definition. This is how it ended there. So this is a good end for us, good end for the authors. But there are other stories. It was not my story. There was a figure on financing that was there that shows actually that the global north is not, you know, they made the promise to pay for climate change, but actually they are not paying for climate damage, etc. So there was a figure that some countries did not like. They proposed changes to the scientists. Scientists did not agree on these changes. And in this case, the figure has been removed from the summary for policymakers. But being removed from the summary for policymakers does not mean it is removed from the main text, because the report is not approved by them, you see? So this is another option. So there are 3 options. The best option is the end solution. What happened for sufficiency? It was not there. We brought it there during the negotiations, during the approval. The other option is that they just ask for few clarifications and you just clarify. And again, because it's in English, you have only few people who are native English, and it's in English. So you need to clarify, and it's written by scientists, 2 policymakers. And then that's the second option. The third option, which is the worst option, is that you have there is no agreement. Government are asking for changes that are not acceptable for scientists, then they remove it. This is what happened for one of the colleagues, for one of the sections. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yes, thank you for your explanation. And I have another question about the SPM. Actually, if anyone from civil society movements can participate in reviewing, no, it's not possible.
No, actually, yeah, they can participate for the first draft because it is sent. When we send the second order draft, the SPM, this version they can, but then actually the final version is very different from this one. But then after the second order draft, it's only with governments.
You know, I have been in the conference of IUCN. You know, I had to make a board for each agenda and each items. All the activists like me who attended in IUCN meeting, they can make a board for each items, along with government representatives. So
okay,
I think it's very democratic process for important conservation issues.
Yeah.
So is there any possibility to improve the system, IPCC system? Like
yeah, so this is the right moment. If you would like to make changes to bring any good practice to the IPCC process, it's now. But you must do it through your government, because you need to find your focal point in South Korea, because it is now that they are preparing for the next IPCC cycle, and they will have the election of the chair in July. So there is an important meeting in July. So you have less than 2 months. You have 1 month actually to make changes, to make proposals. So I guess you must convince your government of the relevance of the changes that you are proposing, and then your government, given that again it's international negotiation, so your government will need to team up with other governments to make your proposal if they agree on it happening. But this is the right moment.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for your encouragement. Okay.
Yeah, so thank you again for your talk and your heartfelt experiences. Yeah, I think that brings us to the end of this webinar. Again, we'll record this. We have recorded, so we'll add this to our YouTube channel and we'll share it with you. And yeah, I think, do you have a last word to share with us?
Yeah, actually, I have something for you, because, you know, South Korea, I was amazed. I worked before for the OECD, for the International Energy Agency. So for me, South Korea is an OECD country. So I consider South Korea as global north. Mm-hmm. But it's not considered as global north in the IPCC. You are in the south.
Oh, surprise. Oh,
and actually, it's only in the building chapter you were considered in the north. I don't know how they did this in the other chapters. I considered you in the north because I considered you with Japan, because I got, for the building chapter, I used the IEA, the International Energy Agency data, and South Korea is an OECD country. And I was surprised to discover that you are not north. Okay, so maybe something for you to work on to make sure you are in the right region.
Yeah, that is very interesting. I mean, so many things that you explained about this whole thing. It sounds so elusive and evasive.
Exactly. But you know, the IPCC process, if there is one last word to share, is that I really, really enjoyed the IPCC, working for the IPCC. It was during COVID. Actually, I lost my job because I discovered this trade treaty, the Energy Charter Treaty, and I decided to work against this treaty. I decided to work on the withdrawal of EU countries. So I lost my job because of that. And then we had COVID and I was pregnant. I was at home, and the IPCC was a very good way for me to keep my mind busy with good things. And then I went to the IPCC with the idea that I will introduce the sufficiency concept, but I was extremely naive. I did not even realize that we don't have definition in France. You know, for me, it was in the French law and that's it. And I arrived there and people started saying, what's that? So we had to review all the literature on sufficiency to find the literature. So I enjoyed what I have been able to do during the IPCC process, despite all what does not work, and discovering the process as well is interesting. And then you meet there very bright people, and you build, well, in my case, I am far south because I am originally from Algeria, but I live in Paris and I'm French. So you build new relationships, new network, and after my PhD, I did not work on, I left academia. Then for me, the IPCC has been the way to come back to academia to work in this, in the way academia, because I was more working in the interface between science and policymaking. And now I am back, kind of back to academia.
So are you continuing on the next cycle?
No, I don't know yet. I am continuing with the scenarios because now we still have working group on scenarios. I don't know. Actually, I don't want to be a lead author next time. I would continue only if I could get, I'm targeting some chapters.
Yeah.
Because if you are coordinating lead author, then you give leadership to the chapter. You can make change.
I see.
It's a lot of work, but it's a lot of work. You need support from your government because you need people to help you. You cannot do everything by yourself. Just too much. So I personally enjoyed the IPCC despite all what I discovered. But then it's up to us to change it, to improve it. It's up to us through our governments, especially in democracies where the resources are there. I told you, if I compare between my two countries, in Algeria, there is only one guy who has to do everything. In France, we had a team. You see, and this makes a big difference. You see, I don't blame the Algerian colleague. It's just that in my case, I am lucky to have two countries, and one from the north, one from the south, not both from the south. So I was able to compensate for that.
I also want to share with you that it was hard for us to find the right vocabulary for sufficiency, because that concept or efficiency, that debate itself is not existent in Korean language.
Yeah.
So we transliterated, and so it's quite different. But I think your introduction of that, the concept of sufficiency is very helpful for activist organizations like us, because we can use that term and make a relationship with scientific evidence and the policymaking changes that we want to push for.
So I will come back to you most likely in October, because I'm trying to have the word sufficiency, the translation of the word based on the definition in different languages. Because you need to have the word in your language to be able to start working on it. If you don't have it in your language, then it's unlikely that you will work on it, that people could discuss it, etc. And it's good that your organization, if you could take over, because what we are trying to build is what we call the Word Sufficiency Lab, which is actually a network of people working on sufficiency or trying to work on sufficiency. So we'll come back to you with this. If you would like to start this in South Korea, so then you will have, you will be regularly updated of what's going on in sufficiency. And then it's up to you to see how to bring this to South Korea, because I cannot bring it. I don't speak your language. I cannot bring it to South Korea, but you can bring it to South Korea because you know how to bring things in your language, given your context. Because you need to contextualize.
Yes.
This is what we need. So I will come back to you for this later on.
Great. Yes. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for including us. That would be great. Okay.
Okay.
So
thank you.
Nice to meet you. Thank you.
Nice meeting you, and I hope one day we will meet in person somewhere. I have never been to your country.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye. Bye.